My daughter-in-law called the ambulance. Not my son, not my daughter. The woman who married into this family and always kept her distance. She was the one who found me on the kitchen floor and stayed until help came. My son arrived at the hospital 40 minutes later, not because he was scared I might die, but because my lawyer had left him a voicemail about the property deed. My daughter never came at all. 3 days later, they both showed up together, walking down that hospital corridor like they owned the place, because they thought they soon would. But the room was empty, the bed was made, and on the pillow sat an envelope with both their names on it. When they opened it, my son had to sit down. My daughter started shaking. They had been so certain. They were wrong. The pain woke me first. A deep grinding pressure across my left side, like someone had stacked bricks on my ribs while I slept. I remember thinking it was the cold. January in Sudbury does that. Gets into your joints, makes you feel older than you already are. I tried to stand up from the kitchen table, and my legs just didn't cooperate. One moment I was reaching for my coffee mug. The next, the floor was coming up fast. I don't know how long I lay. The linoleum was cold against my cheek. The refrigerator was humming. A CBC radio program I hadn't been listening to was chattering away on the counter. Normal sounds, ordinary Tuesday sounds, and me, 71 years old, lying between the table and the stove, thinking, is this it? It wasn't fear exactly. More like a strange, hollow clarity. I'd built a good life. 42 years as a civil engineer. A house I'd paid off. A retirement fund that my financial advisor called responsible. 2 kids I'd raised mostly on my own after their mother passed. And in that moment, with my face on the kitchen floor and my arm going numb, my first thought wasn't about any of that. It was about whether anyone would come. My daughter-in-law had been dropping off a casserole dish she'd borrowed back in November. That's the only reason she was there. She knocked. No answer. She heard the radio and knocked again, louder. She looked through the side window and saw my feet sticking out from behind the counter. I remember her voice, calm and clear. I'm right here. Don't try to move. I've called for help. She held my hand until the paramedics arrived. She rode with me to Health Sciences North. She sat in the waiting room for 2 hours while they ran tests. I found all of this out later, piece by piece. She never once mentioned it herself. The cardiologist, a no-nonsense woman in her early 50s who spoke like every sentence cost money, told me I'd had a significant cardiac event. Not a full heart attack, but close enough that the difference felt academic. She said I needed to stay for observation. She said I'd been lucky. She said that word the way doctors sometimes do. Not as a compliment, but as a warning. Is there someone we should contact? The nurse asked. Clipboard ready. I gave her my son's number first, then my daughter's. My son called back within the hour. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He said, I heard you collapsed. How serious is it? I told him the doctors were monitoring me. There was a pause. Then, right, okay, I've got the Whitfield project wrapping up this week, but I'll try to get up there. Try. He'd try. My daughter's response came by text. I was still attached to the cardiac monitor when the nurse handed me my phone. The message said, Oh no, Dad, I'm in the middle of something. Keep me posted, okay? Keep me posted. Like I was a weather system moving through. I set the phone face down on the blanket and stared at the ceiling tiles. There were 112 of them. I counted twice. It gave me something to do other than feel the specific weight of what had just happened. The next morning, my daughter-in-law came back. She brought a thermos of proper coffee because she knew what hospitals served. She sat in the chair beside the bed and asked me actual questions. How was my sleep? Had I eaten anything? Did I want her to call anyone from my church group? I asked her why she came back. She looked at me like the question surprised her. Because you're family, she said. Simple as that. No hesitation. Just those 3 words, delivered like they were obvious. I turned toward the window. Outside, the January sky was the color of old concrete. I didn't trust my voice right then. My son arrived on the 3rd day. He was dressed like he'd come from the office, which he had. He stood at the foot of the bed, hands in his coat pockets, and gave me the kind of look you give a situation you're assessing rather than a person you love. He asked about the prognosis. He asked about discharge timelines. He asked, and I remember this precisely, whether I had updated my power of attorney documents recently. I said no. I watched his expression for something. I couldn't find it. He stayed 40 minutes and left to take a call in the parking lot. He didn't come back up. My daughter arrived the following afternoon with flowers, yellow chrysanthemums, the kind from the grocery store near the highway, still in their cellophane. She hugged me like she was performing a hug rather than giving one. She told me I looked good considering. She told me about her week. She checked her phone twice while I was in the middle of a sentence. Before she left, she mentioned, very casually, that she and her brother had been talking, that they were worried about me living alone, that maybe it was time to think about the house. The house, I said. It's a lot of upkeep for one person, she said, straightening the cellophane on the flowers. And the market in Sudbury isn't what it was. If you sold now, selling my house. She smiled the way people smile when they think you're being stubborn about something you'll eventually come around on. We just want what's best for you, Dad. After she left, I sat for a long time in the quiet. The cardiac monitor beeped its steady, indifferent rhythm. The flowers smelled like nothing. On the small shelf above the sink sat my watch, the one my wife had given me the year I made partner. Stainless steel, simple face engraved on the back. Always Heather. She'd been gone 11 years. I picked it up and held it and thought about what she would say right now if she could. She would say, "You already know what to do." She was usually right about that. I called Patrick that evening. He'd been my solicitor for over 20 years. We'd gone to university together. He'd studied law. I'd studied engineering. We'd stayed friends across 4 decades in several cities before we both ended up retiring near the same town. He picked up on the second ring. "I heard you gave everyone a scare," he said. "I gave myself a scare," I said. "I need to see you when I'm out of here. Sooner rather than later." He understood from my tone. "I'll clear Thursday. Don't say anything to anyone in the meantime." A pause. "James," he said, using my name the way old friends do when they want you to know they're paying attention. "How bad is it?" "The heart thing, I'll survive. The other thing?" I watched the monitor's green light pulse in the dark. "That's what Thursday is for." He came to the hospital instead of waiting. That was Patrick, always preferred to be useful over being convenient. He sat where my daughter-in-law had sat, pulled a yellow legal pad from his briefcase, and listened without interrupting while I told him everything. The call from my son about the project timelines, my daughter's text, the conversation about the house, what my son had asked about the power of attorney. When I finished, he tapped his pen on the pad twice. "And your daughter-in-law?" he asked. "She's been here every day," I said. "She brought real coffee." He almost smiled. "Right then, let's talk about what you want to do." What I wanted to do turned out to be more complicated than I'd expected. Not because I was uncertain, but because I was finally being honest about things I'd been excusing for a long time. My son had borrowed $43,000 over the past decade. Some of it I'd forgiven formally. Some of it had simply been absorbed into the silence between us. My daughter had her mortgage topped up twice by money she called a loan and I had never once asked about. The TFSA I'd been contributing to for 15 years. The GIC ladders my financial advisor had set up. The house, with its paid-off mortgage and its second bedroom full of my wife's books that no one had touched since she died. I'd assumed, in the vague way you assume things about family, that they knew what it all meant, that they felt the weight of it, that they understood what I'd sacrificed and saved and built, not for myself but for a future I wanted to leave behind. The phone call proved otherwise. Patrick and I talked for nearly 2 hours. By the end, I had a clear picture of what I was going to do and a list of things he needed to prepare. He left with his legal pad full and a look on his face that I recognized from the years we'd known each other. Not judgment, not pity. Just the particular expression of someone who is about to do something that will matter. "Give me a week," he said at the door. "Take 2, I said. "I want everything airtight." My son called that night. He'd been speaking to his sister, he said. They were both concerned about my care situation going forward. They'd been looking into some options. There were some very good retirement communities in the greater Sudbury area. He listed amenities like he was reading from a brochure he'd probably downloaded that afternoon. I let him finish. "I appreciate the concern," I said. "We just want to make sure you're taken care of, Dad." "I know," I said. "Get some sleep." I hung up and lay in the dark and thought about the word "taken care of" and what it meant when the people saying it had spent 3 weeks not coming to see you. Patrick called 6 days later. Everything was notarized. Everything was filed. He'd used the firm's senior associate for the estate amendments and a notary from another office for the financial designations. So nothing had passed through a single point that my children could later claim was irregular. He was thorough that way. It was why I'd trusted him for 20 years. "It's done," he said. "All of it. The foundation paperwork too, registered with the CRA. Name approved. You can announce it whenever you're ready." I thanked him and ended the call and sat with the quiet for a moment. Outside, the February sky had gone the deep blue-gray that means snow is coming. Inside, the cardiac ward hummed and beeped and carried on. My watch sat on the shelf. The flowers my daughter had brought were starting to brown at the edges. The next morning, the cardiologist signed my discharge papers. The nurse, a young man from Cape Breton with an easy manner, brought my clothes in a plastic bag and helped me with the compression socks I'd been prescribed. He told me to take the stairs slowly. He told me to follow up with my GP within a week. He asked if someone was coming to pick me up. "My daughter-in-law," I said. He nodded like that was a good answer. Maybe it was. While I waited for her, I sat on the edge of the bed and wrote 2 letters. Not on hospital stationery. I'd brought my own notepad from the small bag I keep packed for travel, a habit left over from 30 years of site visits and project reviews. My handwriting has gotten smaller as I've gotten older, more careful. I took my time. The first letter was to my son. The second was to my daughter. I didn't write them in anger. I want to be clear about that, because I've thought about it since, and the absence of anger is the thing I'm most certain of. What I felt was closer to grief. For the relationship I'd believed we had, for the version of them I'd been carrying around in my head long after it had stopped matching who they actually were, for all the times I'd made excuses, because making excuses was easier than seeing clearly. The letters said what needed to be said, not cruelly, not at length, simply. I sealed them and left them with a nurse, with instructions to hold them for delivery. Patrick would handle the rest. My daughter-in-law arrived at 10:30. She'd brought my good coat from the house. She had a spare key from when she'd watered my plants the summer before last, and a travel mug of coffee. She didn't make a fuss. She signed the paperwork at the nurse's station and waited while I said goodbye to the staff and walked out into the February morning. The cold hit like a door swinging open. After 3 weeks of hospital air, it was almost startling. Real cold, outdoor cold, the kind that reminds you that you're alive and part of the world. We didn't talk much on the drive back. I watched the familiar streets of Sudbury move past the window, the junction at Paris Street, the grocery store where I still buy the same brand of oat crackers I've been buying for 30 years, the turnoff that leads to the elementary school my kids attended. Normal landmarks, a life I'd built, corner by corner. "You don't have to stay," I told her when she pulled into the driveway. "I know," she said. She turned off the engine. "But I'm going to make sure you get inside and the heat's working before I leave." I didn't argue. She stayed for an hour, made sure the thermostat was set right, checked the fridge, rinsed out the mug she'd brought, and left it on the drying rack. She didn't comment on the house. She didn't look at it like an investment or a burden or a problem to be solved. She looked at it like someone's home. When she left, I stood in the kitchen for a moment. The same kitchen where I'd fallen, the same linoleum, the same refrigerator hum, the same radio on the counter. Different now, though. Or maybe I was different. My son called 2 days later. His voice had a different quality, something between controlled and barely controlled. He'd gotten the letter. His sister had too. "What is this?" he said. "I think it's fairly clear," I said. "You're giving everything to a foundation. A foundation you set up last week. I set it up this week, technically." Patrick filed the paperwork on Wednesday, Dad. His voice shifted. Something beneath the anger that might, if I was being generous, have been something real. "You can't do this. We're your family." "I know you're my family," I said. That's what made it hard. He was quiet for a moment. "Then, what's the foundation even for?" "Trades training for young people who can't afford it. Apprenticeships in skilled work. The kind of work that teaches you that your hands and your effort are what you have to offer." I looked out the kitchen window. The backyard was white with February snow. "Your grandfather built his life that way." I thought about him a lot in the hospital. My son didn't say anything to that. "There's a bursary named after your mother," I said. "The Heather Frances O'Connell Bursary, for engineering students at Laurentian who are the first in their families to go to university." I paused. "I thought you might want to know that." The silence on the line was long. "I'm not your enemy," I told him. "I'm also not your bank, and I'm not your plan. I'm your father. And I spent 3 weeks in that hospital waiting to see if you understood the difference." He hung up without saying anything further. My daughter's call came an hour after that, she cried, which surprised me less than I expected. Whether the tears were genuine or strategic, I couldn't say. Maybe both. People are complicated that way. I let her speak. I didn't argue. When she was done, I told her the same thing I'd told her brother, that I loved her, that this wasn't punishment, that I hoped she'd come to understand it one day, that the door wasn't closed, but it wouldn't open with a demand. She said she needed time. I said I understood. The week after I got home, I had coffee with Patrick at a diner we both liked on Elm Street. The kind of place with laminate menus and pie under glass domes and coffee that comes in a proper pot. He looked more relaxed than he had at the hospital. We talked about other things for a while. His grandkids, my physiotherapy schedule, a documentary we'd both watched about the construction of the Confederation Bridge. Eventually he asked about my children. "My son called twice more," I said. "My daughter sent an email." I wrapped both hands around the mug. I replied to the email. I didn't answer the calls. "And your daughter-in-law? She came by on Saturday, brought soup." I smiled a little. "She doesn't know about any of the changes. She wasn't the reason I made them. I want to be clear about that." Patrick nodded, though she was part of what made things clear. "Yes," I said, "she was." He refilled his coffee from the pot the waitress had left on the table. "So what now?" I thought about that. Outside the window, Elm Street moved through its morning. A woman walking a large dog. 2 teenagers on their way to somewhere. A delivery van double-parked outside the hardware store. "I've been asked to sit on the Foundation's advisory board," I said. "There's a technical college in Sault Ste. Marie that wants to pilot the first apprenticeship cohort in the fall. I'm going up there next month to meet with their trades department." Patrick raised an eyebrow. "You're going to be busy." "Good," I said. "I've been a little too quiet for a little too long." He laughed at that, the real laugh, the one I'd known for 4 decades. The diner hummed around us. The pie sat under its glass dome. Outside, the February morning was bright and cold and full of movement. I pulled my wallet from my jacket pocket. Inside was a photograph, the 2 of them years ago at the lake house we'd rented every August. My son was maybe 12, my daughter 10, both of them squinting against the sun and grinning, soaking wet from the dock. I remembered taking that photograph. I remembered thinking, this is enough, this is everything. I looked at it for a moment. Then I put it back in the wallet behind my transit card and my library card and my OHIP card, all the ordinary things that mark an ordinary life. Not gone, just where it belonged. Ready? Patrick said, reaching for his coat. Yeah, I said, and left a tip on the table that was probably too large, because the coffee had been good, and the morning had been good, and some days that's reason enough. The door chimed as we stepped out into the cold. The street smelled like winter and exhaust, and, faintly, from somewhere down the block. Fresh bread. I turned up my collar and fell into step beside my oldest friend, and for the first time in longer than I could easily measure, I felt like I was walking toward something instead of waiting for it to arrive.